I'm here to talk about my latest book on the fate of the human species, EARTH DETOX. Now, I know that this is going to be something that basically a lot of you will say, well, we knew all this stuff, you know, that's why we're organic farmers. I'm coming to you from sunny Kiribati, which has got a lovely organic agriculture, coconuts and vegetables, and it's going underwater within 10 years. Because of a chemical called carbon dioxide, which humans have been producing to excess. And basically, you know, that's the picture. We are now doing things to our planet with chemicals. We're not doing things to the next paddock any longer or a few customers. We're doing them to the entire bloody planet. And that's really what I'm trying to do, is put some numbers around this so that people understand how big this problem is. Now, you know, most people accept that there's 70, 80, 90,000 different chemicals. The latest estimate is there are 350,000 man-made chemicals. And very, very few of those have ever been tested for human safety. They're just being churned out willy-nilly. There's a new one along every 5 minutes. And you know, they're just being unleashed on humans in some kind of horrible chemistry experiment. And it's not just the individual chemicals, it's the mixtures that they're unleashing on us. And it's affecting all the ecosystems worldwide. There's not a single human being who is not being poisoned every single day. Now, the numbers that I managed to put together, I count as chemicals things like eroded topsoil, because it has a chemical impact on the planet. So it's not just the things that come out of the chemical factory, it's also the things that humans do that have a chemical consequence for the biosphere. So, you know, there's, and a lot of that is released by mining. I mean, mining unleashes endless amounts of topsoil and rock into the biosphere, and they acidify rivers and you know, start dust storms and all sorts of things, and cover people with various noxious substances. So, you know, it's not just about the product of the big chemical companies. It's also the fertilizer that people use. I mean, we are now well outside the boundary for nitrogen production on the planet. We're into dangerous area. Nitrogen is more dangerous now even than climate change. There's all the hazardous wastes, you know, all the things we don't like to think about, the iPhones we throw away and things like that, the coal, the gas, you know, all of these things are toxic to human beings. So, and the quantum is 220 billion tons. That's my rough estimate. And I challenge science to do a proper estimate of how much stuff we are churning out every single year. And it's cumulative. It's not just, you know, one-off. The thing about these chemicals is they don't stay still. There's a thing called the grasshopper effect, where they just hop around the planet. They sometimes they glom onto soil particles or something like that, and then they are released again. You know, so they go through different states, chemicals, and, you know, they may be dormant for a period, and then they come back into the biosphere and they start poisoning things. So they're in our air. Obviously, they're in our water. They're washing down the rivers and things like that. They're in the food chain. Wildlife, you can't eat, even in the remote corners of the world, you can't eat the wildlife because of the chemical contamination that they're copying. You know, manufactured products, you sit on your nice new sofa and you're inhaling all these flame retardants and plastic volatiles and things like that, which are utterly toxic. And now we have found that we are even poisoning our grandchildren. What you and I take into our cells, our bodies, as chemical toxins, is doing damage to our genes. And epigenetically, it is affecting the health of people in at least 3 generations' time. There's quite a lot of science coming out about that now. So, you know, this poisoning, even if you stopped the chemical, you would continue to poison your grandchildren. So there are some pretty alarming things happening. I've got a name for this, and it's the anthropogenic chemical circulation. I had to give it a name because it's too big an idea. It's like climate change, except it's much, much bigger. And these things are everywhere. If you test the snow on Mount Everest, you'll find it's full of arsenic from the soil erosion in India. You know, we know about the Arctic. The polar bears are chock full of flame retardants from the sofas of people living in New York. You know, how the hell did sofa chemicals get up to the Arctic? Well, they managed. They concentrated up the food chain, is the short answer. You know, we find chemicals in the deep oceans. We find them all over Antarctica. There's fallout in Antarctica. It's no longer the pristine continent that it used to be. And the remotest islands and atolls in the world, you can find them in the seabirds and fish life around them. So we have literally poisoned the planet. And this circulation is like a giant river that just keeps on flowing. And it's not getting any smaller. Like the plastic, which is a tiny fraction of it, you know, it just keeps on getting bigger and it travels further. So, you know, it's a really concerning phenomenon. Now, we know what it's doing to the oceans. You know, we're getting these dead zones. Back when I was a kid, there were about 50 known dead zones, mainly in the rivers and river mouths of big, dirty industrial cities, like the Mersey, where I grew up, the dead river. Now, there's 760 of these things worldwide, and they are tens of thousands of square kilometers of ocean is literally poisoned. The oxygen is gone because of the changes to the biology in those areas, and fish life and so on can't survive them. So we're poisoning the oceans basically off all of the largely inhabited coastlines. Every individual is a contaminated site. And we talk about contaminated sites, but we are all one. We accumulate these rotten chemicals from the moment we are conceived, not even born, conceived, and then we go through our life. The first thing that most people do every day when they get up, they have a shower, they try and catch cancer. Right? You look at the things that are on the back of your shampoo bottle. Well, I'm sure you all do, you know, because you're organic farmers. But you know, it's horrendous what the rest of society is plastering on itself and expecting its skin to protect it. And of course, it doesn't. So these things are just about universal. The so-called personal care products ought to be called personal harm products because they are basically, you know, harmful. They're doing a tremendous amount of them. Even innocuous, supposedly innocuous things like perfume are actually an assault, a chemical assault on your neighbor or your office mate or something like that, because they're volatile organic chemicals and they're all toxic to some degree. And the point is they're in a huge mixture, which we are inhaling, imbibing, ingesting every single moment of our lives. When the baby is born, it already comes into the world contaminated. In this case, we found they found something like 414 different industrial chemicals in America in newborn babies. That's disgusting. This child didn't even have a chance, didn't have a say, you know, in whether it was going to be poisoned or not. So it comes in, a lot of those chemicals that it's carrying are carcinogenic, right? It's going to carry them for a long time in its young and especially its developing life. The first drink that baby takes, the first drink it takes from its mother's breast contains pesticide. That's World Health Organization data. Studies have been done in dozens of countries, and they all, breast milk always contains pesticides. You know, it's horrendous again. So we poison that baby with its first meal. And by the way, its first poo contains over 1 million pieces of plastic. How did a baby in the womb, which had never had a shit before, when it came out, how did it produce 1 million pieces of plastic in its poo? Well, that plastic has now become so small, the microparticles, that it's getting through the maternal embryo barrier. That's why it's really serious, because those plastic particles can carry other chemicals with them. They're like little taxis. So, you know, we know about the food industry. We know there's 4,000 chemicals used to grow food. And then there's another, you know, 5,000-6,000 chemicals used to process and package and preserve that food. You know, we've heard about EWG's, you know, a dirty dozen fruits and vegetables, the things not to eat because you can't get the chemicals off. You can't wash the chemicals off them because they're water resistant. So, you know, we're into lifelong poisoning here, and something has got to be done about it. The annual toll collectively from all the chemicals produced is estimated at nearly 13 million human lives every year. I want you to compare that with World War II, which cost humanity 7 million lives a year. So we're talking about something that is twice as bad as World War II in terms of its lethal cost. And there's 86, 90 million people crippled every single year by chemical exposure of one sort or another. How long can we go on ignoring a problem that big? Yet we managed to. We talk about climate. We've had all this blather about climate the last few weeks. Nobody mentioned the chemical thing, which is 5 times larger. 5 times larger than our climate emissions, our chemical emissions. Right, so this is a much, much bigger problem, and it's killing. Climate is probably killing about 1 million people a year at the moment. It will kill an awful lot more, but at the moment, about 1 million. So you can see this is a problem that's at least 10 times more deadly than the climate problem. Interestingly, human IQ is now starting to decline. Why? Well, we don't yet know, but giving everybody a cocktail of brain-destroying chemicals every single day would be a pretty good way to do it. Now, the decline in IQ, think about that a moment. What it means is, first of all, an upsurge in criminality and violence in society. Secondly, a whole lot of stupid people voting for stupid things at elections, and basically we are giving away our democracies now. Any thought of actually people having a rational decision about who governs them is gone, because the IQ of the human race is falling at a rate of about 3 points per decade. Okay, so 3 points is what the kids lost at Port Pirie because of the lead smelter that was contaminating their homes and their schools and things like that. So 3 points of IQ. If you lose 6 to 7 points of IQ, you've got the same IQ level basically as somebody who's in Long Bay jail, right? So that's what's happening to society at large. And as I say, the most likely suspect in all of this are the neurotoxic chemicals that are all around us now. A great many new diseases are emerging that are caused by chemical exposures, basically. Look at cancers. They think now somewhere around about 2/3 to 3/4 of cancers are environmentally caused. That means they are caused by a chemical that is in your living environment, or chemicals. We don't know which ones, any more than we know which chemicals in the 7,000 that occur in cigarette smoke actually give you the lung cancer. But we do know collectively they give you an awful lot more cancer. So that's just an obvious one. But it is the upsurge in brain diseases which is most striking. ADHD, autism, Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, depression, all of these brain diseases are much more common, and they are affecting hundreds of millions of people worldwide. Why? Because most of these chemicals are poisonous. They're neurotoxic. Many of them are neurotoxic. And so, there's a whole lot of new medicine coming out now, and medical science that is showing the impact of these, of these chemicals. And, it's not an amber light any longer, it's a red light, but we're still not paying attention. Governments are not doing anything about this. Here's an example, basically Philip Grandjean and Philip Landrigan have been banging on about this for a couple of decades now at Harvard School of Public Health. Basically kids are getting their brains damaged at a very early age, at the developmental age. These kids do not have a chance to develop normally. So why do we spend so much money on schools and universities and training for the human mind when we damage the human mind in infancy? We've got to ask ourselves questions like that now. It is high time, because this problem is just too damn big. Out of the 350,000 chemicals that I mentioned to you, only 21 have been banned. And you can work it out for yourself. It's going to take hundreds. We've been banning them at the rate of 1 a year. So it's going to take us 1/3 years to ban the rest at the current rate of progress. Something like 2,000 new chemicals are released on the market every single year by companies that just don't give a damn. They are there to make money, and they don't care how many people they poison. And they reckon you'll only find out about the poisoning after about 30 years when you get a cancer cluster or something like that. So what I'm saying is that this system at the moment is uncontrollable. Regulation is not doing the job. And we have seen situations, which you'd be more than familiar with, where we've replaced chemicals that are bad, like the ozone depleters. Well, we replaced them with climate depleters, didn't we? We replaced DDT with the neonicotinoids, and look what's happened to the bees, So really, we're just seeing the same old thing happen again and again. Untested chemicals are released to replace chemicals that have been found to be bad. And it's just a system for printing money for certain individuals. Not very many individuals. We're talking about a few hundred people who are board members and major shareholders of the world's chemical companies. They're making a bucket load, basically, out of poisoning 10 million people a year. Dear old Rachel Carson told us all about this in 1962. Since she did, there's been a 5-fold increase in the use of chemicals in agriculture. And as Jane Goodall said, who would have thought it was a good idea to use poison to produce food? It's wacky, basically. There are lots of examples of chemical disasters. Now, they're mounting up. There's literally dozens of them. Every country has had them. We've all heard of Minamata, Bhopal, the Love Canal, and so forth. But nothing happens. Nothing happens. There's a legal fight usually. The victims get inadequately. First of all, they have to prove that they've been poisoned, and it's very hard to do that. And even if they succeed, the compensation is usually miserable. So these fights with chemical companies, they're not getting us anywhere. They drive the chemical companies into two places. First of all, behind razor wire and lawyers, and secondly, into other countries where they're not regulated. So most of the chemical industry has now migrated to Asia, where it is not regulated or controlled. And that's why a lot of the dirty old chemicals are coming back to us. It's why dioxin, which has been banned for decades, since 1986, I think, you can buy it at your friendly local garden centre, from a dirty manufacturing process producing herbicide for your garden, basically. So it's almost impossible to avoid these things. And addressing them site by site is never going to work. There's something like 10 million contaminated sites worldwide, and only a minute fraction of them have ever been cleaned up. But they are not the issue. The issue is that the Earth is a contaminated site. So who's responsible? Well, basically, you and I. I mean, we are the ones who send the market signals to different industries, telling them to produce chemicals. Every act of consumption on our planet has chemical consequences. Whether you're buying food, whether you're buying a new shirt, whether you're buying a motor car, whether you're buying a home, whether you're buying a bunch of shoes like the lady in the bottom left, basically those things all have huge chemical consequences that go well beyond the product itself, the manufacturing system, the waste that is produced, and so on. We need to understand that we are the ones getting away with murder, with the 10 million people who are killed every year. It's us, it's our demands, it is money that is generating this slaughter. Right, we are not short of ideas about how to clean up the world, right? There's lots and lots of stuff in science at the moment: green chemistry, life cycle assessment, zero waste. You've heard about a lot of these things. You are part of the process of trying to clean up agriculture. But again, it's still only a small proportion, isn't it? It's, the green chemistry is very popular in the scientific literature, but at the moment, about 0.001% of the world's chemicals are made by green chemistry rather than dirty chemistry. The chemical industry has got a lot to answer for, basically. And the money is in dirty chemistry every time. So these are difficult things, but the solutions exist. That's the point I want to make with this slide. The bottom is a picture of the Sydney Homebush site, which had a massive cleanup. There was a horrid old bloody chemical plant there and army munitions and all sorts of dirty stuff. And when they cleaned it up, the value of that land went from $0 to $600 million practically overnight. So there are real rewards for cleaning up land. But as you all know, cleaning up soil is not easy and it's very bloody expensive. And when it gets contaminated, it stays that way for a long time. Okay, well, in the book, I put forward a 10-point plan. And I think we need an alliance around the world. Your organization needs to join hands with every other organization, the American Breast Cancer Foundation, every organization that is speaking out about the chemical peril to our children and to the planet and to the wildlife in the planet. So, you know, the WWF, all of those people are worried about this, but they are not speaking as one. We're all speaking with separate voices and nobody is paying any attention, right? We need a human right not to be poisoned. I'll come to that in a moment. We need to establish, because this problem is 5 times larger than climate change, we need an international body that is studying it constantly with the best minds of science, like the IPCC, but for chemicals in general, not just climate changing chemicals. Oddly enough, the answer for the chemical pollution problem is the same as the climate problem. Get rid of fossil fuels completely, and you've got rid of 3/4 of the problem. Okay, so, you know, zero carbon is a solution for actually cleaning up the planet. If we're not turning our petroleum into pesticide, you know, but we're making it by softer other methods, or we're using alternative approaches, then, you know, basically we've cleaned the place up. So it is possible. We need to train our young chemists that you can't just get away with murder. You must, like a doctor, you must first do no harm, right? At the moment, I think the ethics of the chemical profession are very, very low. They are not answering the question. They're all about making money. They are not trying to clean the place up, and they need to big turnaround. You know, we need to teach our children. We need to teach our children to choose products that are safe and clean and healthy. Whether it's the food, whether it's the apple in the supermarket, whether it's the shirt, whether it's the toy, you know. My daughter will not have any plastic toys in the house. You know, I've got to be very careful when I'm shopping for my grandkids. But, you know, it's sensible. It's really sensible to take that approach. We need to reward industry like your industry by buying green. We need millions, billions of consumers who are demanding the clean green product. So we're talking about a global education campaign here. And this is why everybody needs to join hands. We're not just talking agriculture, we're talking every form of human activity and manufacturing. So, you know, and everybody who's concerned about human health, all joining hands to fix this problem, because as I say, it's much, much larger than climate. There is no inventory. There is no inventory of chemicals in the world. We need one. Desperately, we need every single chemical that is produced by anybody should be on a register with a statement of what its chemical properties are and how toxic it is. You know, unless we're safety testing every chemical that is going to be released, we're going to keep on poisoning people. That's inevitable. As far as agriculture is concerned, some of you may have come across my book, Food or War. Basically, I think that agriculture as a system for producing food is going to largely break down in the mid-century. The reason is a combination of soil loss, water loss, climate change, and chemical toxicity. Basically, it's going to get very hard to do traditional style agriculture. So I'm envisaging a future food system where about 1/3 of the world's food is produced by regenerative agriculture, which is much more resilient to climate change. 1/3 of it comes from urban food systems, which are, again, low or no chemical systems. And 1/3 of it comes from deep ocean aquaculture, which, again, is low or no chemical. Because you don't, if you cram fish into nets, you get diseases and you have to use chemicals. You put them out in big open farms in the deep ocean, you don't have those problems at all. You're basically ranching fish rather than rather than farming them. So that's the kind of food system that I believe we're going to need to feed 10 billion people on a hot planet. And it involves really moving away from chemicals in a big way. I talked about the new human right. I mean, basically, the right not to be poisoned was enjoyed by every single human being since the beginning of time until about the middle of the 19th century, when coal really started to come in. Every single human being enjoyed a right to perfect health, at least to start with. Nowadays, not a single human on Earth has a right to go unpoisoned. Okay, and so we need to change that. We have a right not to be tortured, but we don't have a right not to be poisoned. And yet poisoning is a form of torture. And the people who do it need to be prosecuted in the same way that torturers are prosecuted. You know, we all have a right to adequate health and well-being, but we don't have a right not to be poisoned. If we do not have such a right, there will probably never be another day in history when we are not poisoned. On the positive side, people are hooking up all around the planet at the speed of light, on the internet, on social media. They're sharing ideas for how we tackle these problems. You know, the ideas are flowing from Australia to America to China and back and forth. Farmers are discussing better ways to produce food without chemicals. You know, consumers are discussing how to get the nasties out of your baby's diet, etc., etc. So there's, you know, when the Breast Cancer Foundation in America comes up with a new recommendation, don't use these cosmetics, that flows around the world almost instantly. So we're now getting humans starting to connect at the speed of light. It's like we're creating a gigantic Earth-sized mind. We are starting to think for the first time as a species, not as individuals, right? And so I see this as the most important evolutionary development of the last million years, that humans are now starting to communicate with one another instantaneously. By 2030, everybody is going to be on the internet, everybody. Most people have already got a mobile phone. So, you know, the possibilities for sharing knowledge about how to live in a clean world, how to cleanse our world, how to get rid of the nasties, who's polluting and who's doing the right thing, are going to increase dramatically. So we need to increase this bonding and this synergy, this exchange of ideas and thoughts and information and education for consumers worldwide to get them buying the good product. Basically, that's a brief summary of what's in the book. There's a lot more there. It'll give you lots of statistics. It's heavily based upon science. There's something like 500 scientific citations in it, you know, and I think anyone who reads even the first chapter will wake up in a cold sweat. They'll start to realize how big this problem is. Thank you very much.